G'day, welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I'd like to do a bit of a myth busting video. What I want to talk about actually is smart bullets and smart targeting systems. Start off with, I suppose I'll start at the smart bullet. I think it was called the X-Acto bullet or something like that, homing around all sorts of bits and pieces I've heard this called. But it's the logic that it's the technology supposedly that can give you a bullet to an average shooter, take an average shooter and make them into an expert marksman. So a deadly sniper type is the logic of what we're working with here. I think the DARPA were involved listen, then I don't know enough. It's more rumours and innuendo or what I would call myth, to be truthful. The logic is there's a bullet that has an optical system, it has a processing system and has a guidance system to be able to get it to target. And listen, I'm here to tell you that that isn't conceivable in the form of a bullet. Now, is it conceivable in the form of a dart? Is it conceivable in the form of a missile? Yes, it is. Whether it's practical, I would think not, but it's not conceivable in the form of a bullet. The bullet goes in a cartridge and is fired down a barrel of a rifle, which is this logic. It's going to go into a rifle that can do this. And that means that the way a rifle works, and if it's called a bullet, then it does get fired in a rifle. That's the nature of what a bullet is. And that actually goes down a barrel, amazing, fairly old technology, 150 years old, but a barrel, or it's a rod with a hole in it, with a thread in there, and the bullet forces down there, goes out with a lot of speed, spinning very quickly for stability, modern bullet shaped nicely so it'll flow through the air. So it gets the target carrying as much energy as it can, as accurately as it can, or as close as it can to exactly where the barrel was pointing when the bullet escaped it. So there's a couple of things that make the smart bullet not real. One is the bullet, to get its energy to target, the projectile to get its energy to target, and we'll call it a bullet because that's what we are talking about, is it needs to have a whole heap of weight inside it and a good shape to do that, so when it hits target it can do something. There's no point it being super light. It's not going to get its job done. That's its energy is in the fact that its inertia is also in it. It doesn't have a little rocket coming out of it. It just carries the inertia from when it was released. And so it needs that weight down there. So if you take that heavy lead out and replace it up with little computer chips and optic sensors, things like that, you've reduced its weight, which means it can't carry its weight there. It's going to slow down faster. It's going to have less energy when it gets there. So that's impractical to start off with. It turns what its job was into something that can't do very well at all. But there's a far more logical thing. I suppose the other bit, if you had all that sort of stuff in there, why would you fire it down there? Why would you spend so much in technology and targeting systems into a little tiny bullet that can only do a little tiny thing anyway to start off with? That's pretty impractical. But the big impractical piece is the way something can guide itself to target is it must have a little tail, a little set of fins, a little set of something or other to actually guide it to target. Here's the thing. The way a bullet works is to make it so that it will travel to target with its efficient shape and all that sort of stuff has to be spinning very, very quickly. When I say very, very quickly, I'm talking 100,000 to 300,000 RPM. So that's thousands of times a second. So there's no way that you could have anything trying to direct it one way or the other way. There's no time for it to, if it needs a little adjustment to the left, well, the left is 1,000 times or 5,000 times or 10,000 times a second the other side. So it's not going to be able to guide itself in any fashion like that, simply through the nature of the basics of a bullet spinning that quickly. Like I said, if you turn it into a dart or into a missile, which means it's got its own propulsion, or it's a dart where it's actually traveling straight through, it's got a tail fin so it can drive itself, okay, that's a different conversation, but that is not a bullet and that's not coming out of a rifle. So you would simply go, if you do that, then you'd probably have something that works differently, it's a different system, and we're not talking smart bullets. Not saying that our military and the people with lots and lots of money don't have a shoulder mounted thing that can do that. But as for a smart bullet, no, it's not real through the basic physics of what a bullet has to be. So whether that's propaganda, whether that's sales, whether that's just a good story that someone come up with to keep you distracted, look over here rather than look over there, I don't know. But the smart bullet is not a real thing. Okay, so the next bit of technology, which is a real thing, but it's not what people think it is, that's not going to work the way people think it is, and that's smart aiming system. I've forgotten the name right now, but I'll have to look up what the smart aiming system was, what it was called. But basically it was a special scope that had multiple lenses in it. Basically it had the ability to, you could pick your target, you press the button on it, and that would mark the target. And then when you rack around and you go to fire it, you pull the trigger, nothing happens until it sees the crosshairs aligned dead straight up, and then it releases it. So this is once again to get a person who's only an average skill to be able to do expert marksman work. This is on the logic that where your crosshairs are pointing, the only thing you have to do as a marksman, the only thing a marksman's really good at is pointing really accurately. That's what it's really hard, which is pretty funny if you actually know how rifles work, because getting to point really still is really very simple with the right equipment. That's not the problem, is probably what I'm saying. The logic that exactly where you're pointing is where it's going to go. It might work in games, but it's not how actual rifles work. Your form, your trigger pull, your muscle memory, your platform, your round, your ammunition, your rifle, everything from equipment to skill to knowledge is more important, or at least as important as where your crosshair is pointing. The fact of the matter is, which some people still struggle with, but most people understand the basic physics of how a rifle works, or how a firearm works. And that is that when you pull the trigger, when it goes bang, in whatever form, when it goes bang, the bullet starts moving one direction, the rifle starts moving the other direction. There's some slow motion footage here that shows exactly that. That in actual fact, the barrel has, on these bits, which is just the muzzle, has started to move backwards in this case before the projectile goes forward. Now, if the backwards movement we're looking at there, that's a big piece of movement, and if it happens all the same and it's dead straight backwards, that doesn't affect where it's going. But the more to the point is that it starts moving prior to the bullet release. So if you, with what you're happening with your trigger pull, what's happening with how it sits your shoulder, what's happening with muzzle rising up, what's happening with the butt backing down, what's happening with everything else, with only a few thou of movement up, down, left, right of that muzzle, something you're not even going to be able to see in a slow motion footage like this, it's going to move away from target. It's going to end up 1 thou of movement here ends up with 1 inch of movement there, or if it's a long shot, then 1 meter of movement there, or 2 or 3 or whatever that is, all the details of it. It's that movement we're concerned about, and that consistency of movement. So if you look at the top level of shooting, probably in your F class, and that's target shooting, you'll see they've got monstrous great big setups on the front to hold the rifle on the fore end, and they've got big heavy bags on the rear, and how smooth that rifle slides backwards and forwards. If you watch how my target shooting is with me and Sam, how consistent the rifle moves, that sort of things, that is the really, really important detail. And that's not even talking about anything other than getting the projectile to travel exactly where we were aiming. The more important detail, once you go into long range stuff, is what's happening with the air. Yes, the air moving one way or the other way, push on the bullet will push it off target. It's only a little bit, but a little bit is a lot when you talk about long range. The barometric conditions, the barometric pressure, the humidity, the air pressure, all sorts of stuff that are out there change where the bullet actually ends up. So not only do you need a monstrous amount of skill in how you shoot the rifle, but also you need to know a lot about what's going on the air out there to be able to work things out. And that's not even talking about the fact that bullets take time to travel. They're real things. So they travel through the air, they slow down as they travel through the air. So when you're shooting to somewhere at any distance, once you go past 100 yards, then 300 yards, 400 yards, 500 yards, 1,000 yards, 2,000 yards, whatever it is, that's off into the future. It might only be 1 second or 2 seconds or 3 seconds, and we've had shots that are up to 15 seconds, but it's off into the future. So things are changing. The conditions are changing. If there's a target you're shooting at that's a moving or potentially moving target, it can be changing. What I'm actually saying with all this sort of stuff is that when you look at something that simply gives you the ability to make sure it's pointing exactly at where you thought it was when you're shooting, is, I said 1/10, it's probably 1/100th of the problem. So I suppose the nuts and bolts of what I'm trying to say here is, don't be frightened by or in awe of a system that says it's going to turn someone into an expert marksman. No, it's not. An expert marksman comes out of an enormous amount of skill. Yes, there's going to be good equipment. Yes, there's going to be lots of training, lots of logic and lots of bits and pieces to go with that process. But there's also going to be an enormous amount of actual expertise or experience involved to get a really good marksman. And even the best of the marksmen, if you talk about the extreme long range shots or even long range shots, once you're shooting past 1,000 meters for most of the world on that side, once you're shooting even to that distance, but once you're shooting past that distance, then you're really moving into where you're going forward in time to start off with. The conditions are the real key of what's going on, but the likes of this one shot, one kill, that sort of stuff, the fear that people have to go with that side of things, and we're putting this extremely dangerous and powerful deadly system into someone's hands or into a novice's hands. No, it's not a real thought. It's not something that can actually happen. And even for the best, there is still a lot more going on than what you think about. Target shooting and what the likes of we do and what the likes of your F-class and your competition is, yes, they're trying to get that group and get that to the absolute best group and that sort of stuff, but you'll still find that first shot, which is the one that everyone's worried about, is still something that takes a little bit of time. They have what's called sighters in target shooting, so you can see where your conditions are, you verify your conditions, and then you can get yourself on the target. And then it's actually, target shooting is about making sure you're staying up with the conditions, so you can read the subtle changes and bits and pieces. But that whole sniper thing, that whole deadly force sort of fear that goes with things, which may be a little bit of what this is about, trying to encourage that, it certainly can be used in that way. And it's certainly part of the reason that I'd like to put forward and say to everyone, okay, settle down. It's not the way it really is. The likes of a smart bullet, no, pure fantasy. There's no grey areas about that. Well, that one is pure fantasy. The likes of a targeting system, there's so much more to it than where your crosshair is pointing. And it's, I suppose, ultimately that's what makes the long-range target shooting, all target shooting to be truthful, but long-range target shooting and the extreme long-range stuff we like to do, what's so, well, fun, inspiring, challenging to do about it is it's simply not able to happen no matter how much you spend on equipment, no matter how much you train, no matter what you do. It's still always going to be an extreme challenge just to get on target. Actually getting close and how well you do in those conditions, that sort of stuff, that's what the real fun is. The getting a hit sometimes can be the cherry on the cake, but the thought of one shot, one kill, and what you're going to be and that sort of stuff, and to be a true deadly sniper and that sort of stuff, no, well, that fits under the fantasy of the smart bullet. So anyway, guys, I hope that makes some sense. I've got some more myth busting to come, but that's this one for those two, I suppose. For this moment, I hope you enjoyed. We'll catch you next time.